The sky over occupied France looked polished, too perfect, like glass scrubbed clean. Sunlight flashed off canopies and wing roots. Oxygen hissed inside masks, turning each breath into a measured, lonely sound. High above the haze, German fighters held altitude like kings on a balcony. Their engines purred at cruise power. They watched new shapes crawling upward from the west, and amusement spread through the formation. The American aircraft looked wrong to their eyes. Big belly, round nose, thick fuselage, wings that seemed undersized. It climbed like an overloaded elevator, stubborn and slow, offering the enemy time to judge it. A veteran German pilot leaned into his gun sight and smiled. He had fought sleek Spitfires that rolled like fencing blades. He had fought Soviet fighters that turned inside reason. This thing looked like a mistake that had escaped a factory. Then one of the heavy Americans rolled on its back. It did not turn to meet the Germans. It did not flee toward cloud cover. It simply tipped over and began to fall. The dive started gentle, almost lazy. Then air piled onto the airframe, and the sound sharpened into a rising scream. The big fighter gathered speed like a dropped anvil. The German pilot's grin held for one more heartbeat. A hard, synchronized chatter cut through the wind. 8 guns fired as one, and the sky in front of the Thunderbolt turned into a bright, straight lane of tracers. The laughter met the first impact and died without ceremony. The men seeing this were not watching a duelist arrive. They were watching a different kind of answer to war. The aircraft was ugly by European standards, and honest in its ugliness. It promised only survival and violence. To understand that promise, the story must pull back from that instant of falling metal. In early 1943, the American daylight campaign still searched for a working shape. Bombers flew deep, slow, and exposed, like iron churches without stained glass. The 8th Air Force needed escorts that could live where bombers lived. That meant cold altitude and thin air. It meant engines that did not choke above 20,000 feet. Germany had built for climb and bite. America was about to build for staying power. One young American pilot, newly arrived in England, became the quiet witness. He was not famous, not yet. His logbook held trainers and bright stateside fields. Now it held gray seas, blacked-out airstrips, and the taste of fear through rubber. He first saw the Thunderbolt on a wet morning when the runway shimmered with oil and rain. Ground crews called it the Jug, short for Juggernaut. The nickname sounded like a joke until he stood beside the machine and felt its bulk. The P-47 seemed built around a single idea: power first. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp radial engine filled the nose like a clenched fist. 18 cylinders made a thick, confident rhythm, and the sound did not apologize. Behind the cockpit, hidden under panels, sat the reason for the airplane's swollen shape. A turbo-supercharger and long ducting ran through the fuselage like a metal organ system. The ducting came first in the design, and the rest was forced to fit. At about 27,000 feet, that system helped the engine hold maximum power. Above 30,000 feet, where other fighters began to feel sluggish, the Jug stayed fast and workable. It was an advantage measured in oxygen, not in grace. German pilots, watching from above, did not yet fear oxygen. They feared angles, surprise, and experience. In 1943, many of them were veterans of multiple campaigns. They had learned to read silhouettes the way hunters read tracks. The Thunderbolt silhouette made them laugh because it looked inefficient. It climbed slowly compared to lighter interceptors. It did not appear to belong among fighters at all. The young American pilot heard the jokes through rumors and understood their bite. Early combat confirmed the Thunderbolt's weaknesses. It could not outturn a Focke-Wulf in a tight circle. It could not climb like a Messerschmitt at low altitude. When it tried to play the enemy's game, it paid in speed, and speed was life. Inside the cockpit, the Jug felt heavy on the controls. It responded like a truck on ice, slow to commit, slower to stop. The American pilot tightened his grip and tried to force the airplane into being something else. The airplane refused. It punished pride with a stall buffet and a sudden sink. It taught its lesson in the only language the sky respects. It said, "Fly me as I am." That lesson cost metal and men. Thunderbolts returned with holes stitched through wings and tails. Some did not return at all. The squadron's laughter, when it existed, was thin and brief, yet something strange kept happening in those brutal early weeks. The P-47s that were hit often kept flying. Their air-cooled radials lacked vulnerable coolant systems. They absorbed damage that would have turned slimmer aircraft into falling fragments. The young pilot saw one jug limp home over the channel, trailing smoke like a torn banner. Oil filmed the windscreen. The landing was crooked, but it was a landing. Ground crewmen stared, then moved with practiced urgency. The jug's main armament explained the other half of its personality. Standard P-47D variants carried 8 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns. Each gun typically held 425 rounds, for a total of 300-400. It was a prolonged argument strapped to wings. German pilots were used to cannon punches and short bursts. The Thunderbolt offered something else: sustained pressure. A pilot could keep firing through a long tracking shot. In aerial combat, half a second can be the difference between escape and fire. But guns do not win by themselves. The young American pilot learned that the hard way. In his first fight, he squeezed the trigger too early, watched tracers pass behind a turning enemy, and felt the shame settle in his stomach. After the mission, men gathered around gun camera film. Frames flickered and mistakes became visible. Nobody shouted. The room felt like a workshop, quiet and relentless. The jug demanded discipline, and discipline could be built. In the months that followed, American tactics changed because they had to. Pilots stopped trying to spin with the Germans. They stopped chasing turning contests at medium altitude. They began to treat altitude like money, something to save and spend with purpose. Cinematic cold returned at 30,000 feet. Frost crept along canopy edges. The engine's vibration seeped into bones. Radios hissed, and the sky looked empty until it suddenly wasn't. When German fighters appeared below the bomber stream, the Thunderbolt stayed above them. The American pilot watched the enemy like a hawk watches movement in grass. He waited for the moment when gravity could be used like a weapon. Then the formation rolled, inverted, and dove. Speed built fast and clean, and the jug became a falling wall. The Germans saw it and tried to break away, but the closure rate erased time. Tracers began to stitch, and aircraft began to burn. The Thunderbolt's dive became its signature. Weight, mocked as a flaw, turned into momentum. In a steep plunge, the jug could outdive opposing fighters, creating a one-way escape route when a fight went wrong. The young pilot felt the pressure in his chest as the aircraft accelerated. He felt the control forces stiffen at high speed. He learned to make small, careful inputs. The jug could be a hammer, but hammers still need aim. There was another problem, one no amount of courage could solve. Range. Early P-47 escort missions could not always stay with bombers deep into Germany. Luftwaffe formations learned to wait at the edge of escort, then strike the bombers when the jugs turned back. On those days, the American pilot watched B-17s continue eastward while his fuel gauges fell. He wanted to follow. Wanting did nothing. He turned home and carried the helplessness back across the channel. The air war became a math problem written in distance and consumption. Bombers needed protection the whole way. Until that was solved, every deep raid held a shadow. The Thunderbolt, for all its strength, could not stretch the map by itself. Yet the jug still changed the cost of combat. A German pilot often needed more time and ammunition to finish one. Time meant exposure. Exposure meant the American above you might line up those 8 guns. Even a near kill could become fatal hesitation. By late 1943, new aircraft and new plans reshaped the escort picture. The P-47 began to shift roles in many units. It did not fade away. It leaned into what it did best: speed in the dive, ruggedness under fire, and brutal firepower at close range. The invasion of France brought that second identity into full daylight. The air over Normandy became crowded with purpose, layered with fighters at different heights. Black and white invasion stripes cut across wings, turning aircraft into moving signals in a sky full of nerves. On the ground, men looked upward more than forward. Roads became exposed arteries. Rail lines became lifelines that could be cut in minutes. The jug arrived low, fast and loud, and the sound hit the body before the bullets did. The National W.W. Museum later described Allied tactical air power as an overwhelming capability in 1944. Fighters maintained air superiority, interdicted supplies, and punished road-bound columns. American fighter bombers, primarily the P-47, ranged ahead of armored formations in armored column cover. For the young pilot, the first low-level attack felt like stepping off a cliff. Flak bursts were no longer distant puffs. They became sharp cracks beside the canopy. The ground rushed upward, full of trees, wires, and sudden misjudgment. A jug in a dive was a hard target for gunners. It came in fast, released, fired, and was gone. HistoryNet emphasized that in ground attack, the P-47's great strength was its fearsome rate of dive. A 3-second burst could pour tremendous weight of bullets into a target area. The American pilot learned to see the world in brief, violent snapshots. A locomotive crossing a bridge, a convoy turning into a village, a column of trucks stopped by craters. Each target was a few seconds of alignment, then a spray of sparks and smoke. The recoil of 8 Brownings made the aircraft shudder. The gun sounded like a metal drum roll that never softened. Tracers bounced along roads and railbeds, and vehicles began to burn with a heavy, oily fire. German troops called these attacks terror from the sky, even when they survived. The fear was practical. Without control of the air, movement in daylight became a gamble with loaded dice. Men hid under trees and in ditches, scanning upward for the next roar. The Luftwaffe tried to contest the invasion skies, but the air umbrella was dense. Fighters stacked from low altitude to high cover. A German pilot could not climb above the net without being seen. He could not dive beneath it without entering more guns. Up high, the jug still hunted. Down low, it smashed logistics. The aircraft that looked like a joke in 1943 now served as a tool of constant pressure. Its presence meant Germany's war effort bled in small daily cuts. Numbers tell part of that pressure. The Smithsonian's account of the jug's ground attack achievements from D-Day to VE Day lists 86,000 railway cars and 9,000 locomotives destroyed. It lists 6,000 armored fighting vehicles and 68,000 trucks destroyed. The totals read like a nation's movement being dismantled. The young pilot understood that each destroyed truck meant ammunition not delivered. Each wrecked locomotive meant reinforcements delayed. War was not only duels in the sky, it was supply lines, time, and exhaustion. Meanwhile, behind the front lines, the deeper engine of victory kept turning. The P-47 became the most produced American fighter of the war, with totals often cited around 15,783 built. The figure matters less than what it represented: replacement, continuity, and pressure without pause. Different records list totals with slight variation across models, but the scale remains staggering. Thousands of jugs meant the Luftwaffe faced a repeating problem. Every loss on one side could be repaired by a factory schedule. Every loss on the other side was harder to replace. The defining moment for the young pilot came not in a dramatic speech, but in a quiet shift inside his own head. He stopped trying to prove he could outturn Germans. He stopped rushing shots. He began to fly like an engineer, using altitude, speed, and timing. On a clear afternoon, he climbed above a bomber stream and waited. The cockpit was loud even in stillness. Frost formed at the corners of vision. The Thunderbolts rolled together and dove. The sun flashed across wings. The airframe trembled as speed rose. The pilot's world narrowed to a gunsight ring and a moving target that grew larger each second. He squeezed the trigger at the right distance. The jug shook with recoil. 8 streams converged, and the enemy aircraft jerked as if struck by invisible fists. Smoke appeared, then flame, then a break in the structure. The German pilot never saw the face behind the gunsight. He saw only tracers, then failure. The aircraft began to fall, not as a choice, but as a collapse. A parachute did not appear. The American pilot pulled out and climbed back into cold air. His hands shook slightly on the throttle. He did not cheer. He simply breathed. The jug had done what it was built to do. Below, the bomber stream continued forward, steady and immense. Above, more Thunderbolts reformed for another pass. The fight was not a single duel. It was a system repeating until the enemy's margins vanished. If you're still here, you already understand the power of these human moments inside massive history. Tap like, subscribe for more WY2 documentaries in this style, and share your location in the comments. Tell us what story you want next, and which aircraft deserves its own episode. By 1944 and into 1945, German pilots faced more than tactical problems. Fuel shortages, disrupted training, and relentless Allied presence shrank their options. A veteran's instinct mattered less when the sky was always watched. For German ground troops, the Thunderbolt became a sound that changed behavior. The roar meant scramble for cover. The guns meant keep your head down. Even when a column survived, it moved slower at night, cautious and delayed. The Jug's legacy is built from contradictions. It was designed as a high-altitude interceptor, yet became a feared ground attack aircraft. It looked clumsy, yet it was deadly when flown to its strengths. It could not always escort deep, yet it shaped the battle space where it could reach. In museum lighting decades later, restored Thunderbolts sit quiet and polished. The metal seems peaceful, almost harmless, yet the shape still carries the old lesson. Beauty is not the measure of danger. German pilots laughed because they mistook bulk for weakness. They thought a fighter must be slim to be lethal. The Thunderbolt answered with physics, with gravity, and with 8 Brownings firing together until air became solid. The young American pilot, now older in memory, understood the deeper truth. He had not been flying a mythic duelist. He had been flying an industrial idea made airborne: survivability, repeatability, and overwhelming firepower. The laughter ended not in a single famous fight, but in repetition. Each dive was a reminder. Each stream of tracers was a warning. Each shattered aircraft was a receipt. In the thin, bright skies over Europe, inevitability had a sound. It was not elegant, it was not poetic. It was thunder, rolling in fast, and the hard hammer of 850s that left no room for jokes.